Around the world, millions of people go missing each year, and many of those cases remain open for years on end. With so many cases reported on a daily basis, it stands to reason that there will be few that end in bizarre and unexpected ways. Number 5. One day in April of 1957, 25-year-old David Bigelow McDonald from Hartford, Connecticut, left his home from where he was to travel to Boston, where he was supposed to go look at a new car. David was a Wadsworth Athenaeum Art Museum night watchman and Korean War veteran who was honorably discharged from the military. He left his house after saying goodbye to his pregnant wife, wearing a brown tweed suit and a gray topcoat. He withdrew $265 from his bank account and promptly disappeared without a trace. His wife would give birth to their daughter the following month in his absence. A local newspaper would run a story on his disappearance, but no leads were found, and for the next 50 years, no one had any idea what happened to David. Then in 2007, a man called Eric Niels Sundgaard, living in a boarding house in Seattle, was diagnosed with cancer, and he was told he only had about a week to live. Eric had befriended a woman named Gladys Vance after arriving in Seattle, and he grew close to her family, who loved him for his kind nature. Upon hearing his diagnosis, Gladys's granddaughter, Heather, took Eric in so that he wouldn't die alone. After he passed away, Heather was going through his belongings when she found an index card on which he had written. To her shock, the card revealed that Eric was, in fact, David McDonald. Upon contacting his family in Hartford, his wife, Lydia, stated that she suspected he was still alive after all those years, after a friend of David's on Cape Cod received a salmon packed in ice from the Seattle area. Number 4. In 2010, Kenneth Rodman traveled from the US to Port Douglas in Australia on a tourist visa where he visited with friends. One day, he informed his friend that he was going to kayak from a beach near Mosman to the village of Cardwell, which was approximately 200 miles to the south. When he did not make contact with his friends as planned, they reported him missing and a search was launched. No leads were found until 2 weeks later. His green kayak was found submerged at a beach about 17 miles away. The area where his kayak was found is known to be infested with crocodiles, and in the summer, the ocean is often swarming with deadly box jellyfish. Police were unsure what happened to Kenneth, and Senior Sergeant Ed Lucan, who was involved in the search, stated that he always wondered about Kenneth's fate. Ed had always hoped they would find him alive, but after finding his kayak where they did, they knew there wasn't much hope. Ed would later be transferred to Smithfield Police Station near one of the northernmost beaches. On June 28, 2015, Smithfield police were at the scene of a burglary at 2 a.m. when they received a report of another break-in. They made their way to the second call, and while investigating, a man passed by riding on a bicycle. Believing that he was involved in the first break-in, they gave chase and the man sped off on his bike. When he refused to stop, the dog squad joined in on the chase and they found his abandoned bicycle by the side of the road. The dogs found his scent, which led into thick scrubland, and after searching for a while, they found the man hiding in a creek bed. He immediately told them that he was Kenneth Rodman who had disappeared 5 years earlier, believing that this was why he was being chased. He was cleared of any wrongdoing in the burglary, and he was escorted to the very police station where Ed Lucan had been transferred to. Number 3. In 2005, Zhao Yun was a 14-year-old teenager living in eastern China. She was an avid gamer and, like most teenagers, had a rebellious streak, especially when it came to listening to her parents. Her mother was a strict woman with a quick temper who would often scold her daughter when she did something wrong. But one day, such an incident would change their lives forever. Even at such an early age, Zhao had run away from home on a previous occasion due to high tension in the family. On this day, she'd gone to her father to ask for money. He decided not to give it to her, stating that she was lying and she didn't really need it, which infuriated her. She decided that she'd had enough and that she would run away from home, probably for good this time. And so she left her family home and disappeared without so much as a clue to where she would go. For the next 10 years, her parents hoped she would come back home, even leaving their home phone number unchanged in case she decided to contact them one day. But as years passed, hope dwindled and they eventually gave up, presuming that she must have met an untimely end. Then, on the 20th of November, 2015, police were performing routine checks at an internet cafe in one of the nearby cities. They asked one of the women who was gaming for her identification, and when she handed it over, it was found to be fake. Upon further questioning, she eventually admitted that she was in fact Zhao Yun. She revealed that after leaving home, she'd supported herself by playing her favorite online shooting game, Crossfire. She was paid by other gamers to log into their accounts and accumulate high scores, since she was so good at that particular game. She would find odd jobs now and then, working as a cashier, and she spent every night for the following decade sleeping in internet cafes. Number 2. Carlos Sanchez Ortiz de Salazar lived in Spain in 1995. He was 26 years old and had earned his degree in psychology, worked as a licensed doctor, and spoke multiple languages. Although he was still a young man, he had accomplished a lot and his future seemed bright. But then, in 1996, his family was notified that he had disappeared from his home. A massive search was underway, and police were joined by Carlos's family members, as well as volunteers from the community. But despite their best efforts, he was nowhere to be found. The case remained open for the following 14 years, but with police coming no closer to learning what had happened to him, Carlos was officially declared to be presumed deceased, and the search was terminated. Then, 5 years later, in 2015, a group of hikers were walking near the woods in Tuscany, Italy. The area that they were in was well known for producing large amounts of edible mushrooms, and they decided to see if they could find some to harvest. Initially, they were unsuccessful, so they decided to split up and cover more ground deeper in the woods, where they were sure to find something. But instead, one of the groups stumbled upon a trail of trash that they thought must have been left there by campers. As they walked, however, the trash trail continued, and they eventually found its source. In a clearing, deep in the woods, was a makeshift campsite made from a tarp for shelter and bottles hanging from trees to catch water. As they approached, a man emerged from under the shelter, his face dirty and covered with a large beard. The hikers were scared and fled the area, but soon returned with the ranger who questioned the man, since they were in a nature reserve. He told the ranger that his name was Carlos and he'd been living there for 20 years, since he had no interest in living amongst other people. When asked for his identity documents, he presented an old passport and a library card under the name Carlos Sanchez Ortiz de Salazar. His family in Spain was contacted and they flew to Italy, but when they arrived at the campsite, he'd already disappeared into the woods once more, likely living off the land to this day. Number 1. In 1929, Connie Franklin was a 22-year-old man living in St. James in Stone County, Arkansas. He worked as a farmhand and would occasionally cut timber to earn a living. He met a local girl called Tiller Ruminer, and the two fell in love almost immediately. Tiller would later tell police that on March 9th, the couple had decided to get married, but before they could go through with their plans, Franklin disappeared. Most of the residents in St. James believed that Franklin had merely left town of his own free will, while others found his sudden disappearance highly suspicious, since all of his belongings were left behind and his mail was still being delivered to the same address. One such skeptic was a woman named Bertha Burns. She decided to look into the matter for herself and came across a blood-stained hat that belonged to Franklin in the woods. She also claimed to have heard a scream coming from that area on the night of the disappearance, and she would ultimately lead police to a pile of ash that she claimed was Franklin's remains. With this new evidence being found, the local sheriff decided to question Tiller again. Tiller claimed that she and Franklin were attacked by 4 men who not only assaulted her, but mercilessly beat Franklin before burning his remains in the nearby woods. When asked why she hadn't reported the incident earlier, she stated that she feared for her life and that the 4 men would harm her again if she spoke out. The sheriff presented a small amount of evidence that he had before a grand jury, but Tiller refused to testify, and so the jury would not grant an indictment against the men. Shortly after, a deaf and mute man named Reuben Harrell gave a written statement saying that he saw Franklin being carried into the woods on the night in question. In December of that year, a trial was held, and the 4 men, along with Alex Fulks, maintained that they were innocent. In the meantime, 2 families from Humphrey, Arkansas, believed that they had found Franklin and rushed him to claim the reward that was there to be offered. The family of F.K. Marks made it to St. James first and presented Franklin to the defense attorney. After much speculation and tests being done to establish whether this man truly was Franklin, he took the stand at his own murder trial. Here, he confessed that his real name was Marion Franklin Rogers and that he was 11 years older than he had claimed. He had a wife and 3 children, but after being placed in a mental institution in 1926, he escaped and had been on the run ever since. On the day in question, he and the men on trial were on their way to procure a wedding license when he fell off of his mule and hit his head on a rock, causing the bloodstains on his hat. The next day, Tiller told him that she was postponing their wedding until the fall, but Franklin insisted that they got married immediately, or he would leave forever. She declined, and so he kept his word and left town. Tiller would later confess that she had indeed simply lied about his murder. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knots, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.